Put it in the group chat. Put it in the group chat. We'll be recording.
I'll leave the door. They'll want to check my seatbelt.
Everybody shut
use
up.
the verbiage on the paper. All right? Use the verbiage on the paper, not mine. You're going to check your seatbelt the way he wants it. You're going to ensure that your brakes are out. Truck's in neutral, then you're going to do a safe start. All right. Go ahead and cut your phones off. Go ahead and cut them off. Okay. The engine's running. I'm going to check my mirrors. Use the verbiage. Come across, I'm going to check the windshield. Use the verbiage that he wants. Windshield wipers, you must activate them. High, low, and the fluid. I'm not going to give you the verbiage because I want to use his verbiage, okay? You're going to move in here. Your oil pressure, your water temperature, primary and secondary air gauge, and your voltage meter. If you can't find the voltage meter, tell me to check the voltage meter. If it had one, this one has just the lights. Left turn signal indicator, right turn signal indicator. High beam indicator. Four-way flashes indicator. Both horns. You must activate those. Your meter and activate it with the fan on. Tell him about it in his words. The defroster, activate that as well. You've got your safety equipment, fire extinguisher, 10 BC, 10 ABC, fully charged and in the green. 3 red reflective triangles, tell him about them. 3 fuses, or 6 fuses and 6 circuit breakers. Okay? Then, you're going to push in the yellow knob first, put it in drive, give it a tug. Then you're going to set the yellow brake, the yellow button, push the red one in, pull forward and give it a tug. Push them both in, pull forward 5 feet or 5 miles an hour, apply the service brake, make sure it doesn't shift one way or another. Okay? Then, once you do that, your buttons are in, cut the truck off. Be sure and turn the electrical power back on. Let your gauges cycle. Alright. Then you're going to apply steady brake pressure on the service brake pedal for 60 seconds. You cannot lose more than 4 PSI. Because it's the trailer's air brake, so it's 4 PSI. Alright, you hold it to 60 seconds. If he wants it to full 60 seconds, give it to him. If he says, okay, that's enough, then you can let off. The next thing you're going to do is repeatedly fan the brake pedal until the alarms come on. Now, you must give him air pressure. You let that truck build up to governor cutout, which is 120 to 140. Okay? Can't lose more than 4 PSI in 60 seconds. The next one is you fan it down until you see and or hear an alarm, which should be 60 PSI. Once again, get the verbiage that he wants. We've got that now. Alright? Next thing you want to do is you want to keep pumping the brake pedal down, fanning the brake pedal down, somewhere between 20 and 40 PSI. Both of those buttons should pop out unassisted. And both of them have. Alright? Here you can exit the vehicle, undo your seatbelt, exit the vehicle. 3 points of contact. That's really important. Alright? I've got my headlights on. Alright, I'm going to get out of the truck. Checking my headlights. They're clean, clear, not faded, and they're working. Marker lights, ID lights on the side. Same thing, clean, clear, they're working. 3 IDs, 2 clearance lights, clean and clear. Then you're going to want to go in. You want to do your high beams. All right, then you're going to walk around and check those. Then you're going to do your left signal. You're going to check those. Right signal, check those. 4-way flashers, check those. Then you're going to do the same thing on the side. Same thing on the rear of the truck and the rear of the trailer. Don't forget these lights here. Okay? I got to make a phone call right quick. All right? You guys okay with that?
Yeah.
That help any?
Yep.
Maybe?
You guys are funny. This looks great. Like lemmings falling.
Alright. And I'm going to check my 4-way. You need me to go in the back? I think we got to get on the back. We got to have help with the brakes. But we're going to check our left, right, 4-ways. Your tail lights, which are the headlights on. They'll come on.
Also need help with reverse lights.
And you really need help with the reverse and the brake lights.
Okay, which one is right with the ID light?
Individually?
The 3 on the side.
That's what I'm asking.
Yeah.
Get a long video.
That's
The
three
lights to classify it as a heavy truck.
Yeah, the 3 in the middle are ID.
You have 3 back there too, but they're all red in color. Markers. You'll get those when you walk back in. Marker lights are low, clearance are high. And the one I didn't get on that paper was the clearance lights on the front.
On the front of the dump bed, yeah. Once we get this, we can go inside the cab. Inside the truck. I don't think the other one's on mine. That's it.
Excuse me, big boys.
We're going to check our coolant reservoir. Properly mounted. Caps on tight. Full. It's not leaking. We're going to check our hose coming from the coolant reservoir. It's properly mounted. It's not leaking. It takes us down to our water pump, which is belt driven. The water pump is properly mounted. It's not leaking. The belt is not cut or frayed. And in the center of the belt, there's no more than half to 3/4 inch plate. I'm checking my alternators right here. Properly mounted. There's no loose or missing bolts. The electrical connections are properly mounted. There's no frayed wires, no exposed wires. It is also belt driven. I'm checking my belt. It's snug. It's not cut or frayed. And in the center part, pushing it, there's no more than half 3/4 inch plate. Other side. Squeak out, wipe it off, put it back in, pull it back out, make sure it's at the proper level. Next thing I'm going to go to is my air compressor. I'm going to follow that black line back here. Air compressor's right there. It's properly mounted. It is gear driven. It is not leaking. There's no loose and missing bolts. The next thing I'm going to check is my power steering reservoir. It's properly mounted, no loose and missing bolts. I can check to make sure it is at adequate amount of fluid. I'm also going to make sure the cap's on tight. I'm going to check my hoses coming from the power steering reservoir. They're not cut, they're not leaking. And the bottom hose from the power steering reservoir takes me to my power steering pump. Power steering pump is properly mounted.
It is gear driven. There's no leaks.
Gear driven?
Yes.
The only gear driven.
Next thing I'm going to go to is the suspension system. I have my leaf spring hangers on both ends. They're properly mounted secured. There's no loose or missing bolts. My leaf springs themselves, they're properly mounted. There's no cuts. There's no cracks in them. They're not broke, and they're not shifted. They're all one on top of each other, makes them stronger. Also checking my U-bolts. They're properly mounted. There's no loose or missing bolts. Checking my shock absorber. It's properly mounted. There's no loose or missing bolts, and it is not leaking. Going to my steering mechanism. I have my steering shaft. It's not bent. It's not broken. There's no excessive play. I'm checking my U-joint. It's properly mounted. No loose or missing bolts. I'm going down to my steering gearbox. It's properly mounted. There's no leaks. No missing bolts. I'm checking the hoses on my steering gearbox. They're properly mounted. They're not cut. They're not leaking. I'm going down to my pitman arm, my drag link, my tie rod end. They're all properly mounted. There's no loose or missing bolts. And I'm checking to make sure each one, there are 3 castle nuts and 3 cotter pins there in place, and there's no missing parts. All right, next is I'm going to my brake system. Check my brake hose. It's properly mounted secured. There's no loose or missing bolts. It's not cut or frayed. It's not leaking. I'm going to my brake chamber. It's properly mounted. There's no loose or missing bolts. It is not leaking. I'm going to my push rod and my slack adjuster. They're both properly mounted. The push rod is not bent. It's held on by a clevis pin and a cotter pin. The push rod and the slack adjuster are formed about a 90-degree angle. If I release the brakes, I cannot pull it more than 1 inch. I'm also checking my brake liners. They are not excessively worn. There's no grease. They're free of grease and oil. I'm checking my brake drum. It's properly mounted, no cracks, and it is free of grease and oil. Next thing I'm going to is my tire. I'm checking TOP, tread, overall condition, and pressure. The tread depth on the steer tire is no less than 4/32. It's even wear. Overall conditions, I'm checking ABCs, abrasion, bruises, and cuts. And the P, I'm going to check my valve stem. I'm going to check the air pressure with a gauge. I'm also checking that valve stem to make sure there's a cap on it and it's not leaking. Check my rims. It's properly mounted. There are no illegal welds or cracks. Check my lugs. They're all tight. I'm checking for running rust or shiny metal, which indicate looseness. I'm checking my hub seal. It's properly mounted and it's not leaking. I'm gonna check all my lights on my truck and I'm checking my marker lights. They are all amber in color. They are clean and in place. I'm also checking my clearance light up on top of the bed. They're properly mounted and they're clean. I'm also checking my DOT tape on the truck. It's properly mounted and clean. The one marker light that I have is red, is the very last one. That indicates the last part of my truck. So we're gonna move down at the tire. I'm gonna check my mirror and mirror brackets. Mirror brackets are properly mounted. No loose and missing bolts. The mirrors are properly mounted. They're clean. There's no illegal stickers. I'm checking my door. It's in good shape. The latch is latched. I'm checking the inside and make sure that the hinges can support the weight of the door. I do have my weather stripping in place. I'm checking my stairs. They're properly mounted and they can support my weight. Fuel tank. Fuel tank. It's properly mounted. No loose and missing bolts. There's no leaks. I'm checking my static straps. Make sure there's no metal contact and make sure the fuel tank is on tight. Let's move back. I already got all my lights. This is a reflector. It's properly mounted and clean. All right. I got my drive tires. First thing I'm going to check, the rules say you got to point to or touch. So I'm going to check my brake system. I'll check it right here. I'm checking my brake hose. It's properly mounted and secured. No loose and missing bolts. It's not leaking. You can see I can't see it, but I'm pointing to it. I'm checking my brake chamber. It's properly mounted. No loose and missing bolts. It's in place and it's not leaking. My push rod and slack adjuster, they're properly mounted. The push rod is not bent. It's held on by a clevis and a cotter pin. The slack adjuster, and the push rod form a 90-degree angle. With the brakes released, I cannot move it more than 1 inch. I'm also checking my brake liner. It's properly mounted. There's no excessive wear, and there's no oil or grease. The same with my drums. There's no oil or grease, and there's no cracks. Coming to my suspension, I have my leaf spring hangers. They're properly mounted. There's no loose or missing bolts. They're in place. My leaf springs, they're properly mounted, not cracked. They're not bent. They're one on top of each other, makes them stronger. And I also have U-bolts. They're properly mounted, and there's no loose or missing bolts. Coming in my tire, I'm gonna check both tires. The tread, TOP, tread is no less than 2/32. Overall condition of all tires is no abrasions, bruises, and cuts. And I'm gonna check the pressure on both valve stems with a gauge. I'm also checking my gauge to make sure they have caps and they're not leaking. I'm checking my bud rims. My bud rims are touching. My tires are not, and there's no foreign debris. My rims are not cracked, cut. There's no there's no illegal welds. I'm checking my lug nuts. They're properly mounted. They're not loose. There's no shiny metal or running rust. My axle seal is properly mounted. There's no loose or missing bolts, and it is not leaking. Coming down here, I'm going to check my mud flap. It's properly mounted. It's not dragging the ground. It covers 50% of the tire. Coming to the back, I'm checking my door. It's properly mounted. It's no loose or missing bolts, and it's not. It is secure. Sorry. I'm checking my DOT tape. It is properly mounted and it's clean. I'm also checking all my lights. I'm checking BTT, brake, tail, and turn. I'm checking my brake, tail, and turn. They're properly mounted. They're semi-clean. These are just extra add-on lights. These and these are my reverse lights. And I do have my ID lights. They're properly mounted and clean. When we get back here, we're going to check both electrical lines. You do not have to pull them off, but I'm checking my electrical lines to make sure they're properly mounted and secured. There's no leaks. The grommets are in place and they are not cut or dry rotted. I'm checking my electrical connection. Make sure it's properly mounted. There's no oil or grease in there. You can have electrical grease in there, but I'm checking the lines on the air lines and electrical to make sure they're not cut, frayed. I can't see any exposed wires. I am checking my safety chains. They're crossed. They are properly mounted. No loose or missing bolts. In good shape. I'm checking my D-rings. They're properly mounted. No loose or missing bolts. I'm going to my pintle hitch. My pintle hitch and my pintle hitch release. They're properly mounted. There's no loose or missing bolts. You have your mounting bolts here. They're properly mounted. I have my O-ring. It's properly mounted. No loose or missing bolts. I have my mounting bolts in place and they're locked tight. I have my tongue of my trailer. It's properly mounted. There's no loose or missing bolts. I'm going to check my chains, make sure that they're secured, properly mounted, no loose or missing bolts. And I'm also checking my air coming from the truck to the trailer. It's properly mounted, secured, no loose or missing bolts, and they're not leaking. Coming back here, I have my landing gear. It's properly mounted. There's no loose or missing bolts. I have my crank handle. I'm checking my legs and my feet. They're all properly mounted and secured. I'm checking my tongue storage. It's properly mounted. There's no loose or missing bolts, and I'm checking the interior. All I have in here is two chocks, wheel chocks. I am checking my DOT tape. It's properly mounted and clean. I also have a marker light right here. It's properly mounted and clean, and it is amber in color. My header board is properly mounted. There's no loose or missing bolts. It will hold if I have equipment here that will slide up. I'm checking my D-rings all the way down. They're properly mounted, secured, no loose or missing bolts. I'm going to check my DOT tape here. It's in place and clean. I have a marker light here. I have a marker light / turn signal there. I have another marker light, which is red back there, and I have my ABS light. They're all properly mounted and in place. The ABS light, remember, if it's on, then you have a problem with your ABS. You need to get it checked. I'm checking my side of my trailer and the frame of my trailer. They're both properly mounted. They're not cracked, bent, illegal welds. There's no illegal holes, which can make them weaker. I'm also check my cross members underneath. They're properly mounted, secured, no loose bolt, and the floor of my trailer. It's all properly mounted. As I work way down here, I'm going to check my brake system first. The brake chamber hose is properly mounted. There's no loose and missing bolts. It's not leaking. Brake chamber is properly mounted. There's no loose and missing bolts. It's not leaking. I'm checking my U-bolt, my push rod, and my slack adjuster. They're both properly mounted. No loose and missing bolts. The push rod is not bent, so it'll come in and out of the brake chamber easily. The slack adjuster and the push rod are formed about a 90-degree angle. If I release the brakes, I cannot move it more than an inch. I'm also going to check my suspension. I have my leaf spring hangers on both ends. They're properly mounted. There's no loose and missing bolts. I have my leaf springs. They're properly mounted. They're not cracked or bent. They're one on top of each other to make them stronger. Plus, I have U-bolts that are properly mounted and secured. There's no loose and missing bolts. I also have a torsion bar. That torsion bar is properly mounted, and there's no loose and missing bolts. Coming out to the tire. This is also just like the drive tire. It has a bud rim, but I'm going to check the TOP on the tire. Tread depth is no less than 2/32. There's even wear. I'm going to check the sides of each tire for abrasions, bruises, and cuts. And I'm going to check the valve stems. I'm going to use a gauge to check the air. That's TOP. Tread, overall, and pressure. And that valve stem has to be not leaking, and it has to have a cap on it. I am checking my bud rims. The bud rims are touching. The tires are not. There's no foreign debris. The rims, they're properly mounted. There's no cuts, cracks. There's no illegal welds. The lug nuts, they're tight. There's no running rust, no shiny metal. And I'm also checking my axles, my hub seal. Hub seal is properly mounted, it's not leaking, and you can actually check. You see right here, you can see that there's enough fluid in it. All right, come on back. If I can get up. Come on back, I'm checking my mud flap. It's properly mounted, no loose and missing bolts, and it covers 50% of the tire. I already got this. I'm going to check my ramps. I'm not sure if this is on test, but we're going to check our ramps to make sure it's properly mounted. No loose and missing bolts. We do have DOT tape here on both of those and across. It is properly mounted and it's in place. I'm going to check my BTT, brake, tail, and turn. Make sure that they're properly mounted and clean. And I have my ID lights. Everything on the back of the truck and trailer are red except for the reverse lights and those extra lights that the company added. The only thing unique on the other side is your exhaust guy here. That's the only thing we have to check. The exhaust is properly mounted, secured, no loose and missing bolt. There's no rust, there's no holes, and there's no signs of soot below that. We just don't want any. We don't want any soot out here that can get inside the car. But that's the pre-trip.
Oh,
Pretty simple, right?
it's 30 minutes.
Yeah, I know. But you see, a lot of it was repetitious.
Yeah.
All the brake, suspension. The only thing difference on the suspension was that this had a shock absorber, that doesn't. Tires are all the same except for the tread depth and the bud rims.
And that also has a torsion bar.
And it has a torsion bar.
Question on the.
Did we talk about the drive shaft?
I missed the frame and drive shaft.
Let me add that in.
It's got on a roll.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
All right. The one thing I did forget was the frame and the drive shaft. The frame is properly mounted. There's no cuts. There's no illegal welds, and everything's in place. And the drive shaft is properly mounted. There's no loose and missing bolts. Even on the U joint, you see there's no loose and missing bolts, and there's no foreign debris.
Thank you, sir. Boom. That's it.
How beat up and scratch can this stuff actually be? The DOT tape.
It's not bad.
I know this is fucking perfect. It's
Yeah.
nice.
Yeah.
But I mean, I've seen on different trailers in the yards
Yeah.
that
Probably needs to be replaced.
pretty chewed.
Yeah. If you go on, the back of the truck is so important. There's a video. Just put truck motorcycle accident. It was in South Dakota.
I'm sorry. Can you go over the frame and the drive shaft one more time?
Checking the frame, properly mounted, no loose missing bolts, no illegal welds. I'm checking my drive shaft, it's properly mounted.
Yeah, buddy.